Halfbacks. They're often considered to be the lynchpin of a rugby league team, and with good reason. Along with 5'8", they're often the players, teams and coaches turn to when a game is on the line. During the 1980s, the New South Wales Rugby League was blessed with a plethora of Super 7s. So, I thought we'd do a little countdown of the competition's top 5. Let's get into it. Number 5, Kevin Hastings. There's a reason why the phrase, Kevin Hastings is the best player never to play for Australia, has become such a cliche. You see, despite never donning the green and gold, the durable tricolours half was an award-winning machine during the early 80s. Not only was he awarded the Rothmans Medal in 1981, but he also won 3 consecutive Rugby League Week Player of the Year awards and 3 consecutive Dally M Halfback of the Year gongs between 1980 and 1982. Not bad when you consider he was regularly coming up against the likes of Peter Sterling and Steve Mortimer. Number 4, Greg Alexander. It was clear from the very outset that Greg Alexander was going to be a star. Debuting in 1984, the teenage half announced himself to the rugby league world with a series of mature performances, as the Panthers came within a whisker of their first ever semi-finals appearance. The club went one better a year later, playing finals footy after beating Manly in a midweek playoff for 5th. And guess who was named Dally M Player of the Year? You guessed it, Brandy. Alexander was a late call-up for the 1986 Kangaroo Tour, and while he didn't play a test, he was eventually called up as the first choice halfback during Australia's tour of New Zealand 3 years later. Number 3, Allan Langer. While Langer played the majority of the 1980s in the Brisbane competition, when considering his performances for the Broncos, Queensland and Australia during the latter stages of the decade, it would have been remiss of me to leave him out. A surprise call-up for the Queensland State of Origin side during the 1987 series, the Ipswich product shocked critics from both sides of the Tweed with a series of strong performances as Queensland broke a 2-year series losing streak to beat the Blues 2-1. After joining the Broncos during their debut season in 1988, the diminutive half quickly joined the top echelon of the game's number 7s, leading Queensland to a 3-0 win in the Interstate Arena before donning the green and gold in Australia's World Cup final win over New Zealand. Number 2, Steve Mortimer. You can split Steve Mortimer's career into 2 halves. The first started in the mid-70s and lasted through to the early 80s. During that time, Turvey was a flashy young half with a fair lick of pace and a killer chip and chase, which he often used to create spectacular tries for Ted Glossop's entertainers. However, in the later years, when his pace had diminished, the wily Mortimer was able to adapt his game, becoming a more tactical player who used his nous and strategic kicking to strangle opposition teams as part of Warren Ryan's Dogs of War outfit. A 4-time premiership winner with Canterbury, twice as captain, Mortimer also had the honour of captaining New South Wales to their first ever State of Origin series win. Number 1, Peter Sterling. In some respects, I find it very strange that Peter Sterling's name isn't thrown up in conversations about potential immortals, because during the 80s, there was no finer halfback in the world. Despite being considered slow by halfback standards, Sterlo seemed to have the innate ability to precisely control the tempo of the game, whether it be through a well-timed pass or a pinpoint kick. After making his first grade debut as a fullback during the 1978 final series, Sterlo claimed the Parramatta number 7 jersey in 1980 and went on to be a driving force in the club's golden era of the early 80s, playing in all 4 premiership wins and claiming the inaugural Clive Churchill medal in 1986. While the late 1980s was not a great period for the Parramatta club generally, Sterling continued to shine, making a clean sweep of all the game's major awards in 1987 and putting in one of the greatest individual efforts in the game's history during a memorable 32-2 thumping of Eastern Suburbs. Of course, Sterlo's heroics weren't just confined to club football. In all, he would make 13 Origin appearances for New South Wales and play in 18 tests for Australia, which included 2 undefeated tours of Great Britain and France.